were putting scenarios to our governments, those of us who were working with policy, that were jaw-dropping. We were taken seriously. The measures that were put in place early reflected that. And then it was about having an ongoing discussion about what this actually meant in terms of what could be done.
What the modelling didn't and doesn't do is offer a path to the effective elimination of spread, or in other words, driving it down to very low levels, which is what the New Zealand modelling has done.
So it's not impossible that they could get in New Zealand to, if not total eradication, but to real control sooner.
Models exist to allow health officials and decision makers to test the impact of the various choices before them.
So the modelling up to date has helped us understand what would happen if we didn't put in measures like social distancing, measures like quarantining, measures like border control. Now, modelling and all the other public health tools that we have at our disposal need to support us in looking, planning and preparing for eliminating this disease from our country and making sure we stay free of it as we start lifting those measures we put in place.
And let me remind you of how close and how far we might be to the elimination of spread. This is the graph we need to bend now that overseas transmission is disappearing. It shows, as an example, spread within the New South Wales community. The numbers are higher than they look because we haven't tested widely for community transmission until recently. The aim here is to bottom the curve, not flatten it. Professor Mikhail Prokopenko has developed a model which tries to do just that, taking the entire population of Australia into account, particularly focusing on how closely we stick to social distancing.
There is a clear divide between 70% compliance and 80% compliance. It's a transition, right? So when you have those sharp divisions, it means you found a gem which clearly could be used in decision making.
And on that basis, namely 80 or 90% compliance, he thinks that we get to elimination within 2.5 months.
Clearly there are different camps here in terms of people who believe elimination is achievable, in people who believe suppression is a goal. I think the measures for elimination locally would be incredibly intensive and difficult to achieve given just how infectious this pathogen is. You know, it will not be eliminated globally. And we will have to face it again. So I think we need to be very honest about what would get us out of that position when the virus comes back. Personally, I do not believe that we could have a short, sharp period of activity and then resume our lives as normal.
There are growing pressures to relax social distancing very soon and get life back to some semblance of normality. But there are risks.
This is a highly contagious virus. So the distancing measures that are in place at the moment appear to be doing a very effective job of suppressing the rate of growth, but that's because they are in place. If we ease up on the virus, it is still what it is. It is still highly infectious, and this is why we need a considered approach to taking those next steps.
15 years ago, an American infectious diseases expert predicted a global pandemic like coronavirus would cause pretty much everything that we're currently living through. Dr. Michael Osterholm outlined a battle plan to get through it in his book Deadliest Enemy, Our War Against Killer Germs, set to be re-released next week. Dr. Osterholm, you've been warning about a pandemic for more than a decade, and yet from SARS to Ebola to now this very severe one, we keep getting caught by surprise and on the back foot. Why?
Well, I think, first of all, we really lack creative imagination. And what I mean by that is no one could have envisioned, so they say, all the constellation of things that have happened here, not just a virus crossing from an animal to a human, but that the worldwide transmission, the impact that it has on healthcare, the fact that it also shuts down our global economy. And ironically, those are things we actually published back in 2005 in a series of articles I did back then. And then, of course, elaborated on our book in 2017, Deadliest Enemies, where actually one of the chapters is a theoretical kind of scenario caused by an influenza virus, but it could very well be a coronavirus, of which it's exactly the very same. So we should have been able to consider this and be better prepared, but we just weren't.
How close is what's happening now to that theoretical situation that you wrote about?
Well, actually, it's unfortunately very close to it. I actually theorized that this virus would show up in China, that it would start outbreaks there that would be severe, spread around the world, that we would see the kind of shutdown of the global economy as we've seen, that it would overrun our hospitals and intensive care units in many areas of the world. And then, unfortunately, the part where the chapter diverges right now is not really, in a sense, the difference. It's the fact that it just carries it out for what will likely be at least 16 to 20 months of ongoing illness occurring in our communities around the world, which is what an influenza pandemic would do. And I fear very much that reality will catch up with the fiction that I wrote in that book.
Is there any way that can be avoided?
Well, there really are only two avenues you can take right now. You might say that appear to be on either side of what we can do. One is we just try to basically shut down the world, much like was done at least temporarily in China, in Wuhan. And that, of course, would bring economic devastation to the world. I don't think it could actually really be done because people wouldn't stay in their homes for 18 months. The other side of the coin is one where we just say, okay, it's going to happen, and we let the cases unfold as they might. And then we're really in trouble because our healthcare systems around the world will fall very quickly. Not only will millions of patients die, not just from COVID-19, but even from all the other conditions that they're not able to be adequately treated for, like heart attacks, strokes, asthma attacks, because of the inability of healthcare to respond. And we will lose many, many healthcare workers in that process. Now, I don't believe either of those are the right way. I think we've got to find a middle ground where we, in a sense, thread the needle with the rope and make that work, where we find a way to release enough in society of younger individuals who are not likely to have severe disease and particularly not likely to die, and that we actually start to incorporate them back into an active everyday life. And then when we have evidence that the virus is not circulating widely, we surely let other members of our society make the decision for themselves, but they are able to come out some. And then as soon as we see that virus activity picking up, immediately we do the shelter in place again and try to squelch it. The whole thesis here is that we try to get to a time when we'll have a vaccine, which was hopefully 20 months or so away. And then at that point, then if we can vaccinate the world, we don't have to worry anymore.
So you have some kind of a limited lockdown that waxes and wanes?
Right. You know, until we have a vaccine, the only other way we're going to develop immunity in the population, and this virus will continue to circulate until we have a high level, is from getting the disease itself. And of course, with that comes all the serious illness, the deaths, and that's what we want to avoid. And so somehow we've got to figure out how we can get the most number of people infected, you might say, by living life without causing serious disease and deaths, and at the same time protecting or almost bubbling those people who are more likely to have severe disease. Now that may seem like an impossible task, but right now it's really our only choice. Otherwise, either shut down or don't worry. And of course, with the don't worry one will be catastrophic.
Other recent pandemics didn't permanently change our preparedness for pandemics. Do you think this one might be different?
I think it's going to be very hard for us to forget this one. This will go down in our history much like 1918 went down in the history of our parents and grandparents. Now we have the technology to better prepare ourselves. We can make vaccines that, even if they're not the exact vaccine for this virus, they can quickly be loaded with parts of this virus that could make them be more effective. We also know now that we have to be absolutely concerned about our healthcare systems. And what do we mean by surge capacity? We can no longer gnaw our healthcare systems down to the bone.
Thanks for speaking to us, Dr. Osterholm.
Thank you.
Last week, we asked grandkids to send video messages to the grandparents that they're missing. We were